Hello once again, friends. Josh here. Welcome back to Social Audio Think Tank. I'm here with my co-host, Jackson. What's up, Jackson?
I don't know, Josh. What is up? You confused me there.
I thought I'd go with the most awkward intro ever. So today's episode, I wanted to talk a little bit about news. And this goes back to something we talked about in, I think it was the Deezer-sode. Tech companies buying out podcasting or making references to bringing in podcasting if they happen to be a streaming company. An even more recognizable company in Spotify recently had references in their code for the new version, I guess, of the desktop app and maybe even the mobile apps of their Spotify app or player that they might be bringing in podcasting. I know you weren't that excited about Deezer, Jackson, because you didn't know what it was, buying Stitcher, but how do you feel about Spotify, arguably the world's most notable, I guess, music streaming company, building in the code to, I'm not sure whether they're going to syndicate podcasts or if it's only going to be for premium people, whether they're going to run ads against it, which could be a big fuck up. I know nothing. But how do you feel about another big streaming player, I should say, making a move into the spoken word space?
I guess it's good in that it's sort of fulfilling my dream of having a sort of personalized on-demand radio service that we've seen, like you said, from, what was it? Deez, whatever.
Deezer.
And we were seeing from Omni, but it's sort of like, oh, it's getting there, but it's not really in the way I wanted it to be. And it's more of an add-on to another thing than an actual purpose-built, personalized radio service. It's like, oh, we've got the music. Oh, we'll just tack on some spoken word stuff as well. Yeah, might as well. So yeah, that's sort of how I feel about it. I'm excited and disappointed at the same time.
We might get into why you're disappointed because I think that's probably more interesting a subject. But firstly, I kind of do agree with you that I'm thinking that it's basically just getting added like another feature. In the case of Spotify, Deezer was a completely different play. That was actually buying out a podcast platform or an aggregator in Stitcher, whereas Spotify are just making references that in some way they're going to allow for you to use or listen to podcasts through their same player or app. To me, it just seems like either Spotify have seen or are making judgments about what Deezer is doing that may or may not be what Deezer are doing and think, oh, God, our biggest competitor worldwide is moving into a space. Maybe we should be there too, but there aren't any more big apps for us to go and buy, so maybe we should just put podcasting in there. And or they're just trying to make it as another service to make Spotify just seem a little bit less generic. Hey, we're the first people to support podcasting. Maybe they'll get some more users. It's almost just seen as a secondary marketing tool to get people to use the service as opposed to Spotify really valuing what spoken word and what podcasting can bring to their entire, like the ecosphere, I guess, or whatever you want to call it, the environment of Spotify. What creative value and what long-term value there is there of having that content. I'm not sure that's how they're thinking. I think it's just a play to get more people to subscribe and more people to go onto the free plans. And I don't think that they really care whether it's a guy playing a fiddle or, someone recording the menu of a McDonald's. I don't think they give two fucks really what it is, to be honest. I just think that they need to be there and they're running out of ways of getting new customers. So why not tap into the growing podcasting audience? And with shows like Serial and all those things we've talked about recently blowing up, what better time to be the podcasting leader amongst streaming companies? So I agree with you. I don't think there's much going on there. But why do you say disappointed? Because that's a pretty strong term.
It's because, like, I wanted this to be a thing. I wanted this to happen for a while, but just not in this way. It's like there's so much potential there for it to, if they actually got behind podcasting and properly pushed it and properly integrated it into their system and went out of their way to say, hey, our audience, our customers that like listening to on-demand music, we're going to push on-demand podcasting on you a bit as well and say, you probably will like this. You don't even know what it is yet, or it's not really a thing, but here's some stuff that you might actually like. If they were doing that and not just tacking it on as a feature for people who are already listening to podcasts, because if you're using Spotify and a podcast shows up and you're not already a podcast listener, you're not going to listen to it. So it's sort of pointless. So it's just disappointing that it's not really, I don't think it's going to have as much thought behind it as I want it to.
No, that makes sense. I think there's also a little bit of a feeling of podcasting once again relegated to second-class citizenship. It's always been viewed as the shitty little brother, I guess, to radio for a long time, and I think we know that now the quality of podcasts it really just stands alone as a pretty amazing medium in and of itself. But I think there's also the fact that Spotify is an ad sales company. They say that they're a streaming music company, but really they're an ad sales company because the majority of their users engage with that free plan, which they sell ads on. That might not be where most of their revenue comes from, but they're paying just as much to license that music per track and per stream on the free version of their plan where there's ads as they are with the premium version. So although they would say we want people on premium, they're also selling ads to basically be able to move that content and even have a free version of the plan, which is where I would assume most podcast listeners are going to fall, which is why I bring that up, because none of us are going to use Spotify or pay to use Spotify when we're mostly listening to podcasts, when we can get the same shows for free everywhere else. So basically where I'm going with that is, what reason would Spotify really want to support podcasters and support them when there's already possibly conflicts of interest within the shows? They might have their own embedded advertising. They might be using other companies. I know that we'll probably talk about in the future. I know Podcast One have just pulled a bunch of their shows from Stitcher for some reason. So we'll find out, I guess, what that's about. But they're both ads companies in a way. So it's got something to do with ads and conflict of interest there. Spotify basically make money by selling ads. So unless they're going to build an entire new infrastructure where your podcasts are never interrupted by ads and never have ads in between them, and they don't care that people are running their own ads or selling their own stuff or whatever they do, I can't see that there's much reason for Spotify to really care or really push it.
The other thing is that Spotify do pay royalties to the musicians. It's a big deal that they don't actually pay a lot of royalties to musicians, but there's absolutely nowhere they're paying any of their advertising money to podcasters.
No, well, that's completely true. I mean, there's no reason to, because they're not held to any kind of standard.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no underlying licenses there. Like, there's no mechanical licenses or performance royalties or anything that they have to pay, because you're not composing a melody or lyrics or a composition when you make a podcast. I mean, you could think that you are, but in the eyes of the law, you're not. So it's a different copyright altogether. So you're right. I mean, let's not get into the Spotify thing, because I think it's probably the most misunderstood thing in the music industry at the moment is to how all those royalty splits actually work. In saying all that, there will be a point in the future, I think, where podcasts will be powerful enough that they will demand some kind of royalty from people to use them. Basically, a licensing fee that you'll get our show exclusively through this network if you pay us a certain amount of whatever, a royalty on that play there, and we won't distribute it here, here, and here. But I'm not sure whether the medium itself is big enough yet to warrant that kind of exclusivity. But yeah, as far as the licensing thing goes, there's not the underlying royalties there for people to get paid on. So if any podcaster out there thinks that that's a possibility at the moment, I think that's probably the furthest thing from the truth. And yeah, sorry, that went out into really depressing legal territory then. Obviously, I'm not a lawyer or an entertainment lawyer or anything, but I've been in the music industry for 20 years, so, or thereabouts. So I know some of the stuff on the music side, and it's completely different to spoken word. So was there anything else you thought about Spotify? In general, do you use Spotify? Do podcast fans love streaming music? Like most people say that the age range of podcast listeners is slightly older than your streaming music audience. So do they cross over that much?
Well, I don't really use Spotify for the main reason that most of my listening is done on mobile, and I just don't have that kind of data plan to be streaming music. So yeah, it's not really a thing for me. So yeah, to be honest, the Spotify news is sort of like just a bit of nothing for me, really.
That gets onto a completely different subject. It seems like at the moment, and this is only going to be a short tangent, essentially the whole podcasting industry in the States is trying to find a way to encourage and perfect streaming, because they can do more, or they can more easily do ad insertion into a streamed file. So you're not going to have the same file sitting there forever because people download it once and that's the only one that they're ever going to keep, sort of thing. Whereas if you make everything, eventually I think a lot of it will be streaming only, and I'll be able to basically reinsert ads as you actually pick up the file. So deals that have ended, if you listen to half a file one day and half a week later, there'll be a different ad embed in there at some point, or all those kinds of tricky things are more easy with streaming. And I guess it's probably like what YouTube do. They don't show you the same ad over and over and over and over again, even if you're within a similar sphere of content, because they don't want people to start completely ignoring the ads. All that stuff I think is easier with a streamed file than download. Everyone in the US that's involved in the industry is talking about that as though the rest of the world at the moment doesn't exist. And we're not all, particularly in Australia, we're not walking around with humongous Wi-Fi access, public Wi-Fi access, and or affordable streaming from our service providers, whether our phones or whoever you get your internet connectivity through. We're still downloading before we leave the house. So hopefully someone cares about the audience outside America, because there's a lot more people that live outside America. That's what Peter Thiel said recently in his book. I think it's called 0 to 1, that there's about 95% more people outside America that will be connected to the internet within the next decade than what actually are in America. So that's no slight against the United States, obviously. We're fans of a genre that mostly comes from there. So it's just, I think the rush of the tech companies to provide streaming solutions for podcasting might leave a lot of the fans of the genre outside of the US completely up shit creek, to quote an Australian expression. I don't know if you agree with that, Jackson, or whether you've ever thought about it, but if everything moves to streaming, a lot of the shows I listen to won't be getting listened to.
Yeah. There's also, you sort of brought up a bit about advertising in podcasting there, and I think that's something we've discussed before, but recently I've sort of changed my mind on that a little, and I'm just sort of really anti podcast advertising now. So
we might talk about that at some point, why that is.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a story for another day. But yeah, it's sort of, it really does, the Spotify thing just has no impact on me really, and I don't think it's going to be a great game changer, at least not outside of America anytime soon.
Agreed. Okay, well that was a good one, mate. And for anyone who has an opinion on podcasting, whether you use Spotify, if you actually like Spotify, any rebuttals to my hatred of the pure streaming model, which seems to be getting talked about a lot more, if you think it will be good and you live outside America particularly, because we're all stuck with these rubbish mobile data charges, let us know. So at Joshua C. Liston, if you want to throw some abuse at me, as always. So what Twitter is yours again, Jackson?
I am at GX Jackson.
At GX Jackson. And for today's show notes, socialaudioThinkTank.com, and search Spotify in the search bar there. Well, Jackson, it was really good to talk to you, and I'm not going to go listen to Spotify. I'm going to go listen to a few more episodes of Serial instead.
Me too.
Excellent. See you, mate.
See you later.